you realized that you were the one who'd always stood up to all the bullies and that you had become the bully. Not across the board, just in certain instances of conflict in our relationship, you were realizing that you had become the bully. And I actually I felt this relief that you could see it.
If you've ever been called a know-it-all or a narcissist,
or if you've ever felt lawyered, bulldozed, or shut down in conflict, this episode is for you.
we're breaking down what's actually happening underneath this pattern, why it feels so hard to connect, and how to shift this identity without losing your dignity.
I'm Emily Goff, a relationship coach. I've spent years exploring how we connect to grow and heal in love.
And I'm Kelly Gardner, an embodied leadership coach and communications consultant. Love isn't theory, it's practice.
This is Love in Practice.
Let's grow this. No matter what comes up, they've thought it through. They've got a great answer for why they're doing exactly what they're doing. No matter what it is, they cannot be wrong. And when you get into fights with them, what happens? They pull back and they wait for you to come back and apologize or accept your defeat or accept where you have been wrong so that they can continue the conversation. But until you can, we're good. We don't need to talk about it. And oftentimes this woman gets labeled as a narcissist. I know I've been there. I know that I have ex-partners that have made that argument about me. And today we get to talk a little bit about what is actually going on for this person, what is showing up for their partners, how this pattern plays out, and most importantly, how we can reframe it in a way that is beneficial for both parties and gets to create a really romantic, loving relationship with lots of connection and far less individualism. Ooh, God, even just saying that. Ooh, letting go of my individualism. Oh, my freedom. Oh, my swan song. So, Emily, I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about what this experience has been for you, and so that we can talk a little bit about how we have worked around and worked through it.
For the record, I have never thought that you were a narcissist, bud.
That's all right. I'll take it.
I remember as we were putting this episode together, I remember an argument we had driving back from Canada. So it was a 12-hour road trip. Mm-hmm. And this argument happened quite early in that particular trip as well. So it was a long drive.
Long drive.
There was, I think at one point we didn't speak for like 3 straight hours. There was a whole conversation that we had, and I vaguely remember how it got started, but I don't remember how we got to where we got, which was you actually owning to me in the car. You realized that you were the one who'd always stood up to all the bullies and that you had become the bully. Not across the board, just in certain instances of conflict in our relationship, you were realizing that you had become the bully. And I actually I felt this relief that you could see it because I'd been trying to explain that to you for several months already. Just again, in those very specific moments, I could see it, and I didn't know how to frame that to you in a way that would be better received. But my experience sometimes had been, and sometimes has continued to be in particular moments, you have every answer. I think we've perhaps talked about this on previous episodes where I often feel lawyered by you. That's how I will phrase it, is you phrase it as a wall of words, and I phrase it as like, you just keep lawyering me. And what pissed me off about that more was that I was used to being the one who would lawyer everyone and out-talk everyone. And then I met you. And you out-lawyer me every time. And what that, then, in the reciprocal and in the next few episodes, we're going to be breaking apart various versions of this, including mine. I think I will be on the chopping block, the next one. That would also bring up a lot of shame for me, not feeling like I was good enough. So this pairing of you being the so-called know-it-all and being the best judge of everything, also coming across as a little bit of a bully in these more adaptive expressions of you, that would, of course, perfectly counteract with my own wounding and throw me down my own shame spiral as a result.
So for those out there that are going adaptive, talk about these adaptive expressions.
It's the idea that you and I don't even like referring to these versions of ourselves as unhealthy per se, because they're simply strategies. We talk about this a lot in this podcast, that the things that we do to show up a particular way to get certain needs met are strategies that were learned very early on about how we needed to adapt as children to survive and to find ways to thrive, no matter what set of circumstances we were in. And as adults, that thread continues to carry through, where we are grown-ass humans. We're, in relationship with our partner, and something happens, something is said, there's a particular expression given that's misinterpreted and miscommunication. And all of a sudden that little inner child comes out, and we start reverting to that more adaptive expression of ourselves that is just trying to meet our own needs.
Yeah. You were talking about that trip from Canada, road trip. And in that 3 hours, do you remember what happened while we were not talking? I put on a book on tape during that quiet time.
Oh, I think was that? Oh, yes. That's
well,
right.
let's just pretend it was that trip. I don't
know.
No,
it was. It was later in that trip. Yeah. No, it
but
was
I
that
put
trip.
on
You're right.
Terry Real.
That's right.
I did.
This is where we started to fall more in love with Terry.
Yes, in the heart of our own conflict.
Yes.
This was actually before we started working with him. We came across some of his work, or we were listening to one of his book. I think it was Us.
It's either Us or Fierce Intimacy, one or the other. I can't remember which. Yeah.
But it was talking a little bit about some of these ideas, particularly core negative images, I believe, is what we started talking about. And it gave us an opportunity to really look at some of the ways that we had been negatively seeing and projecting on each other in that conversation.
You are examining the parts of yourself that believe the absolute worst about your partner.
Yeah.
So when they are pissing you off, when they are showing up where their little inner child is taking over, whatever form that's taking, it's like, okay, what are those, what do I believe about my partner in those moments that is kind of shitty? Now, is there perhaps a shred of truth in that core negative belief in particular moments? Yes, there's usually a shred of truth, not a whole truth, but a tiny little piece of. But to share that with your partner is probably going to touch on potentially their own wounding. And for some, it could also press on the worst things that they already believe about themselves that could make it so much worse. Yeah. So you need to be either extremely relationally skilled or even for us, it was a little bit of a risky gamble to play, to be honest. It worked out well, but it could have gone far worse. I would also suggest getting support if you were going to do that type of exercise.
And so getting back to the people like me, we'll talk about this as our frame of being a man in the North or a woman in the North. But that core negative image of me was what I was reflecting back earlier, the narcissist. Now, narcissism is a scale, and highly do not recommend diagnosing your partner in any way, shape, or form. That is not going to be beneficial to your relationship. Leave that to the professionals, and even then, reflecting back that labeling to them generally is not going to be helpful. That is going to be what Terry would refer to as a one-up positioning. Ultimately, there is some truth to that behavioral scale. That there are tendencies that would tend towards narcissism. Right?
And to be clear, just to explain narcissism to people, you and I share this belief that I really feel that the term narcissist gets thrown around way too often, especially in the online space, pop psychology, and narcissism is very much a spectrum. And we all as humans have some version of narcissistic traits. It's just a matter of where you fall in the spectrum. And I think that far more people get referred to as narcissists who actually aren't. I also don't believe it's really our job to diagnose anyone.
Sure.
Yes.
But the diagnosis and looking at my partner and saying, God, they're a narcissist, now is going to not only create this core negative image, but what happens in that is that we tend to see things through the frame that we are already holding. So if I believe that that is who my partner is, then I'm more likely to see their actions through that frame and reaffirm that core negative belief about them. And so we start to pin these individuals that we want to be so loving to and expansive to and believe in, reduce the possibilities of who they can be, closing them in. And so one of the things is, as I said before, the know-it-all, the bully, the narcissist, the controller. All of these can be the negative projections of this person that shows up, as we will talk about more, in the north. But also we have the positive projections, which are the leader, the visionary, the person who has a deep sense of integrity and a compass that directs. So having said that, let's talk a little bit about the compass itself, the tool that we use for helping people to better understand what their patterns and tendencies are, and kind of how we arrive at this space of the directions of the north and south, east and west.
So we have the 4 different directions, and there's also an axis on either side. And this is a whole assessment tool that we've put together over the last few months, many late hours on my incredible husband's part, by the way, putting all of this together. I'd like to brag on you for a quick minute and figuring out not only everything from the tech to everything else. And there is the line of one side of the axis is more holding authority. And that tends to be where the north is very strong. The other end of that is preserving peace. Now, we will get into these other compass directions in more detail over the next few episodes.
And at the core, if we back up for just a second, what we're really looking at are 2 of the most impactful experiences that we have in relationship. One is what happens to us when the connection in the relationship is challenged. And the other piece is what happens when our individual dignity is challenged. These 2 core identities become central to how we are going to show up with each other in relationship. We've seen these over and over. A lot of this is actually drawn from the work that Terry Real has done as well, looking at very similar approaches to relationship. But what we see with our clients, what we have seen with ourselves, is these 2 aspects are at the core of how we shape the patterns that really come up into how we interact with each other. What happens when my dignity is challenged? In other words, my perception, the perception that you're holding of me, is challenged against what I believe myself to be. What do I do in those circumstances? And then when I feel that connection is slipping away, what do I do to preserve that connection?
So I'd love to hear from you a little bit more. What is it like for you? What is your experience of being more in the north? And how does that show up for you on your side of the equation in relationship?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. The first thing that I'd say is, I'm probably a northy north. I'm a very northy north.
He's a very northy north.
And I'm also an Aquarian, which means I have a deep desire to know. It's one of my core identities. I just want to know.
Also a strong visionary.
Visionary.
Well. Yes.
I project out in the future. I'm always looking at patterns. I'm a nerd at my core. So to me, the pursuit of information and knowledge is just a core love and passion. And one of the biggest pains in my life has been being referred to as the know-it-all. That this misunderstanding of me is that I need to be right in order to have a place. And that just doesn't feel true to me. I'm fine if you don't agree with me. I'll still think I'm right. And it's not because I don't need you to believe that I'm right. I haven't heard anything that has disproven the perspective that I've given. But if you do disprove it, and I think you would say this is very accurate, if you give me something that I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, I didn't think about it that way. That's new information. That's different. I was completely wrong. I'm more than happy to be wrong. So it's a difficult place to be in. And often I feel it's projection that people are putting on to me. And oftentimes my judgment is because they actually need affirmation that they're valued for their thinking. And it's more about their need to be right. I'm happy to end the conversation with, we just don't agree. And so that's a tough one. That's always been a tough one for me. But what's underneath it, if I go dig a little bit deeper, there is a version of me that believed that I wasn't very smart growing up. There was a part of me that felt I need to prove myself and prove my intelligence, all the way up to being a university professor and dean of a college. That was a constant proving that I was smart enough. I don't experience myself that way anymore. I feel as though I feel very comfortable with myself at this point. I haven't always, but there's still pieces of me that, when challenged, will feel the need to respond in a way that reaffirms that I am smart, I'm intelligent, I've thought this through. And more importantly, I'd say the thing that I'm working on currently is moving into this role of authority. I understand, I know, I've put in so many years of work on this thing. Yes, obviously, I know, give me some credit here, that is very anti-relational. And so that's one part of it. The other part of it is again, I don't need you to agree with me. We disagree, fine, I'll give it some space. I don't need to come back and continue to have the disagreement or the argument. I'll give it space, as much space as you need. And when you're ready, if you want to come back, great. But I don't need to hammer it home, and me hammering it home feels like the thing that pushes people away. Mm-hmm. So that comes off as my withdrawal. So I'm good. We don't need to talk about it anymore. Fine, I'll go do my thing. Happy to the joke about me as a kid is you put me in a corner with a sack of rocks and I was good for hours, only child, So I'm happy to continue doing that. Again, anti-relational. I don't seek to resolve or to come back to the connection. I trust that the connection will come back to itself in its own time, with space and time in my visionary world. And so that, again, has me pulling back and holding authority.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing all of that. And the other thing that I think needs to be spoken to, yes, you spoke about some of the mature qualities as well. The visionary and just holding lots of information, and the leadership that comes with that, the decisiveness, the clarity, all of that is super powerful. And I also just want to speak to the safety that provides as your partner. That there is deep consistency that you bring that is unmatched. I regularly, for our entire relationship, I have told people, I'm like, no one is as consistent as my husband. And sometimes in the ways that have also pissed me off, consistently pissing me off on particular things too. But overall, clear and away, by far, you are just so beautifully consistent. Even when I am irritated, I can still count on it, on particular things, while still giving you room to grow and change. But it's the safety that brings is invaluable. The leadership, everything else, like it is a really huge gift to get to be with someone who embodies the qualities that you do so deeply.
Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing that happens. We start out with the positive projection of our partner. Almost inevitably, we wouldn't get into this relationship if we weren't seeing them in the positive projection. And in that first stage relationship, hormones are firing. I'm just seeing the positive projection. The positive projection of this person is they're a leader. They've got their shit figured out. They can hold it down. They're clear on who they are. They're clear on where they're going. They've done some pretty awesome things generally in their lives, and they seem like they're adulting, like they're kind of adulting, And then we get into relationship, and they're controlling, they're manipulative, they're fill in the blank on all the negative projections. And so we start to make that shift as the relationship grows, and it's hard to come back to the other perspective.
And I also just I'd love to hear from you a little bit, and I'll share my experience of you with this as well. This whole idea of the compass that we're talking to everyone about. When you started putting this together and we were going back and forth on the questions to put in the assessment, and really this is very intentionally put together, you guys, like every step of the way here. And when you started putting it together more seriously, this was months ago, we had a breaking point in our relationship, unrelated, just, in other ways that we have kind of gotten into a little bit on this podcast as well. And one night, just a couple days, I think, after that, you came to me and I was doing my own thing. It was late at night and you're like, hey, can I share something with you? And I think we'd barely spoken all day. And I was like, sure. I was open to it. I was looking to connect if you were available for it. And you shared with me the results of this first kind of initial test run of the compass. And it walks you through some of the more, positive qualities that everyone wants to read about themselves. And, I was getting emotional reading that because I felt seen on your behalf almost. I was like, yes, like this sees him and the really beautiful qualities that you embody. And then it hit some of, I don't even want to call them negative, again, like more adaptive strategies.
The subtle dominator.
The subtle dominator. That's how it came out. But, the way it broke it down and described it, I started crying because I, again, felt that I was like, oh my God, this is putting into words what I have been so trying to get you to see, not because I think you're an asshole, but because I'm like, hey, I need you to look at this. And I am happy to support you in this area, to do whatever I can do to meet you in these areas, but I need you to see it or we're not going to be able to grow through it. And that was really powerful. And then you showed me mine as well. And it was also very dead on, like almost astonishingly so. And the same thing for me, like, again, we'll get into me in the next one. Don't worry. But I just really want to underscore that because that was months ago. You and I feel, are in the best place we've ever been in our entire relationship. And I have seen you shift fairly dramatically over the last few months, the last couple months, especially as you have deepened into the work that you started recognizing you needed to do from the compass.
You ever wonder why you chose this partner and why they trigger you like no one else?
It's because on some level, we don't choose partners at random. We choose people who reflect the parts of ourselves that most need healing.
That's not a mistake. It's an invitation.
The Relational Compass helps you understand those patterns so you can respond instead of react. And finally, start moving toward connection again.
Take the free assessment at lipcouples.com/compass. Link in the notes below, and find your true north in love.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from you on that because it's been really powerful.
Yeah, I think the first thing is once you see it, it's hard to unsee it. It's like someone once said, if somebody told you there was going to be a yellow VW thing that was going to be the secret to your salvation, you've probably never seen one before, but you'll see one tomorrow.
There's a name for that. There's a law for that I can't remember the name of. But yes.
If you know it, drop it in the comments. Let us know. We're learning every day. I love information. But, I think once I saw that this was something that was work for me, I started seeing it all around me. Started seeing it in some of my closest friends. I started seeing it more and more in subtle ways in our clients and how it was showing up, the men that I work with. And once I became more aware of it, then it became this thing where I really see how it's very subtle, but extremely impactful. That place of authority in particular. I definitely get to be better at moving towards. I wouldn't say that I really pull back. I'm not a stonewaller. I'm not somebody who says I don't want to have the conversation. I'm done with this. If I do say that, it's like I need a break. I'll be back in
it's for like half
3
an
to 5
hour.
minutes,
Yeah.
whatever it is. I'm not that person. But I do have, I'd say, the big one for me is holding authority. That's the one that I get to work on the most. And it feels like the judgment I hold is that it makes sense.
And like, as you're talking about this, can you give us an example of holding authority?
Sure. Well, I'd say early in our relationship, one of the big conflicts that we had was around nonviolent communication.
Oh, God. When you said one of the big conflicts we had, I was like, which one?
We're all doing the work, right? Nonviolent communication. Now, I have been working with nonviolent communication, teaching it for 25 years. It is ingrained into my patterns of speech and also my awareness of communications that people are having. And I remember for a very long time, you got so angry at me. You were like, "Why are you're keeping the rules on how I'm supposed to speak?" And I got to say, that is not a good place to be in relationship. My authority was, look, I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm not trying to say that you're bad or you're wrong, but these are some things that I'm seeing that don't feel good for me. But coming from that perspective, I was coming from a place of authority. I was consistently coming back and from this place of, this is obvious. This is what's happening. This is what I'm seeing. And this does not work for me. Which, from a nonviolent communication standpoint, that was perfectly legitimate.
Totally textbook.
Totally textbook, right? I was doing exactly what would work. Now, I'll get into another conversation around why nonviolent communication really doesn't work. I use what I call compassionate communication and seeking to really help the other person feel. And I think that's something that I've learned in this relationship and over time. But that was one way where I was exercising my authority. It could also be, look, I'm the one that takes care of the home or pays for this or that, and so this impacts me more than it impacts you, and so I have a deeper vested interest in this thing going right. So I need you to understand it. These are the really subtle ways that it starts to show up. It can also be just being right about something. No, this is objectively true. This is the objective truth of what's taking place. I can tell anyone out there, if you're getting into an argument about whether or not there's objective truth in your relationship, you are being anti-relational. I want to say that one more time. If you are having a conversation about whether or not there is objective truth in your conversation with your partner, you are being anti-relational. Relationship's not about the objective truth, it's about the experience of your partner. I think that's the thing that I'm continuing to deepen into, because my brain wants to go to, but this is just truth. This is just black and white. There is an objective reality that we're talking about here, but maybe it just is what the color yellow smells like. You'll have to watch the last episode to learn more about the color yellow and what it smells like.
And what I will say on the other side of that is that I have felt you become gentler, a little bit softer. There have been times where I have been most triggered by you when I have felt your holding authority as holding such a hard line that also felt like an impenetrable wall that I couldn't get through. You are calmer. You are more interested in engaging with me with what I experience as genuine curiosity versus past times when you have asked questions with curiosity. I would sometimes experience it as getting curious to push me into an answer that you had already decided was right, which I have been guilty of as well. So, again, that one is a two-way street, but it has been quite dramatic. And I just really want to underscore that, to not only give you enormous credit, but to also really point to how much the compass has been instrumental in impacting our relationship. And we are two people who came into this relationship, each of us separately, with an enormous amount of relational skills to begin with. So it's really fucking cool to see how much this has shifted our dynamic.
What has really shown up for me is that the realization that it's like quicksand. My strategy is like quicksand. Once you're in quicksand, the harder you fight, the faster you're going to sink. And what's coming in for me is you're challenging my dignity, you're challenging my authority, you're challenging my awareness, my objective reality. So I'm going to come back with all of these reasons why I'm absolutely right. But what's happening in that is that I'm challenging your dignity each and every time. And the response is never going to be positive, provided that I'm challenging your dignity, or at least that it's coming across that way. So that's the thing that I've come to learn. You can call it softening, you can call it whatever it is, but really what I'm acknowledging is that my pattern of addressing when I feel that my dignity is challenged, even in very subtle ways, ends up resulting in a challenge of your dignity, and we're off to the races. And this is the dance that we do. This is where we get into these 3-hour conversations about who's right and who's wrong and who did the right thing and how this thing should be done and how it shouldn't be done. And ultimately, none of that is getting us closer to what we're actually seeking to get to, which is the fight is never about what the fight is actually about.
We haven't had one of those conversations in a really long time, by the way.
I know.
So proud of us.
Thank you. Thank you, Compass. The other piece that I want to talk about here is who is often attracted to this person in the North. And again, I want to be clear that it's not just men. We see women in this position oftentimes. I think a phrase that we often use is the boss babe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can you
the strong, independent woman.
Can you describe that quality a little bit better for people out there?
Yeah, just someone who, a woman, and again, these qualities can all apply to men as well, but just since we're kind of flipping it a little bit to look at the more so-called feminine qualities, the woman who was raised to fend for herself. She can hold it down, and if anyone kind of tries to take it from her, it's a risk to her sense of safety, because there's an underlying fear in a lot of ways that she can't really trust anyone else to take care of her or to figure it out for her. So she needs to be the one in control. This is where the controlling kind of comes in. She is likely financially dependent or working very hard at becoming so. She is the one who is used to making the decisions, running the show, probably wearing the pants in the relationship. And that has also been me in a previous relationship. But it was, yes, partially because of actually embodying the strong, independent woman archetype, but a little bit because the person I was with was a very extreme West. And therefore, no one was in the North. No one had vision. No one had leadership. No one was guiding us or me or the relationship anywhere. So I also really expanded to fill that role because he wasn't going to.
Yeah.
And that's not an insult on him. That's just, he was very, very extreme. And we'll get into that in the West episode.
And this is a really important thing to note about this. And we're talking about these strategies. They're not fixed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I often see that our strategies will change and shift depending upon the partners that we're with and the time or season of life that we're in. The important thing is to not identify as this is who I am, but this is the way that I'm responding currently or have traditionally responded with other partners likely to be doing it again in different ways. And that will shift depending on who I'm with, but that will also shift depending upon what season of the relationship that I'm in. There are times when I might be moving more towards, particularly early in the relationship, where later in the relationship I tend to pull back a little bit more and want a little bit more of my freedom. So I would say even earlier in a relationship, you might say that I was in the East as opposed to being in the North. But the person who is attracted, the beautiful thing that we found is that there's a polarity. We tend to find ourselves on opposing sides in our relational dynamic. So when someone is in a strong north, we tend to pull in a strong south. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just to kind of wrap it up. And in our relationship, I started much more in the south, and I've actually now moved a bit more east. And you, I think, were always lots of north as well. But when we first got together, you were also more east. And now we kind of meet in the middle a little bit more. But the beautiful part about this is that there's still a polarity to this that I'll have you describe a little bit more. Even if you are kind of coming together in and out of a similar compass direction, you're still a little bit of both. Yeah. Like it still shifts. So the South it can be, and it's more adaptive strategies like the nice guy, the nice girl, the good husband, the good wife, the kind of mother caregiver type of archetype. It's someone who is, yes, very emotionally attuned. There's really beautiful qualities there as well. Someone who can really identify everyone's needs without them even saying anything and really step up to fill that gap. But there can also be a sense of safety that is derived from being needed. So if I figure out what all of your needs are and I fill that gap, you should also be able to do that for me, particularly without me actually asking you for it. So then there is resentment that can grow and everything else. Like everyone knows, the nice guy or the cool girl or whatever, they're not really asking for their needs to be met. They are doing what they can to, again, fill the archetype of what they feel is needed and not rock the boat. Very, very strong, typically on the preserving peace element. But they're also simultaneously, they have a lot going on underneath the surface that's not being spoken. And it's actually a little bit dishonest as well.
Yeah. And so we have this polarity where there's this person in the north that comes in with strong leadership qualities. And there's this underlying part of the south that has this desire to be chosen. Right? We refer to this as the orphan in the south, that there's this part of them, this underlying and sometimes can be the negative projection of the South.
Like the abandoned child.
The abandoned child, right? I'm looking for someone who can not just choose me, but lead, someone who I can trust, someone that's reliable and dependable. That's the little part of me, right? And the part of the north, the little part of the north is the tyrant, the little tyrant child that is desperately asking also to be accepted, for it to be okay with their tendency and their need to be accepted for all that they are also not feeling that they're good enough about. And the South is an incredibly attuned caregiver that is the all accepting motherly figure, fatherly figure, that will accept even the ugliest sides of me. And so from the north, I'm looking for somebody who's got arms big enough that can wrap around the world and accept me just as I am. And so we find ourselves in the polarity of these unaccepted parts of ourselves, seeing that this opposing part can accept me. And we shift into these dynamics. And as it starts out as really a positive projection of what this person could potentially be, put them on a pedestal, and then ultimately we start tearing them down with the negative projections. These patterns start to exhibit themselves in relationships, and then they begin to spiral as the adaptive parts of ourselves continue to be in conversation with each other. We get into core negative images of who they are, and then we're off to the races, and it's often hard to reverse that, and that's really the work that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you are interested in taking the compass, if you haven't already by now, all of the information is in the notes below, or you can go to lipcouples.com/compass, and that will take you directly to it. It's embedded right in the page, so you don't even have to go to a different page. You get to just jump in and you will get your results delivered to you instantly and give you more information about that. And seriously, you guys, it has been seriously transformative for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look forward to seeing how we can support you on your journey to having the greatest loving connection that you've ever had in your life. Even if it has gone off the rails, we have seen how it can get back to track towards that loving, deep connection that you're all desiring and are deserving of. Love and practice.